Frankly, Michelle should have stayed home. The country did better when she wasn't trying to lecture us all from the kitchen. The words hit the air like shrapnel. A gasp rippled through the audience, sharp, involuntary, human. The moderators blinked. One coughed to cut the tension. But the silence held, heavy and stunned. Cameras zoomed. Obama didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes locked on Trump, with a look that froze time. It wasn't anger, it was something colder. Disbelief sharpened by history. Rage, steadied by restraint. Behind him, a woman in the third row covered her mouth. A young black man shook his head, eyes wet. Trump smirked, mistaking the silence for victory. But the silence wasn't for him. It was for her, Michelle LaVaughn Robinson. Obama Princeton graduate, First Lady, mother of two, and the woman who told America, "When they go low, we go high." A woman who had endured 8 years of coded attacks with grace, only to be dragged back into the mud by a man who once bragged about grabbing women. Obama finally moved. He sat forward, slowly, as if choosing every vertebrae to unlock. Before words. The room tensed. You could feel the collective inhale waiting for him to say something, anything. His eyes never left Trump's. 1,000 thoughts passed across his face. Memories, calculations, a lifetime of battles fought with words instead of fists. Still, he said nothing. Not yet. Somewhere backstage, a producer whispered into a headset, "Stay on Obama! Stay on him!" The nation was watching, not just for a response, but for a reckoning, because this wasn't politics anymore. This was personal. For every woman who's been told to sit down. For every black voice dismissed as angry. For every partner whose strength was mistaken for threat. Barack Obama stood. No one expected what he would do next. But when he stood up, the room changed. It wasn't just a cheap shot, it was a signal. Broadcast live to millions across the country and millions more around the world, the debate was supposed to be a policy-focused forum. Healthcare, jobs, the border, the usual dance of dodge and deflect. But in a moment that would be replayed for years to come, Donald Trump threw out the script. His words didn't target policy. They targeted a person, a black woman, a former First Lady, a symbol. Michelle Obama wasn't on that stage, but her name, her legacy, her dignity, all of it, had just been dragged through the mud in prime time. And not just by any man, but by the former President of the United States, a man who once occupied the very house Michelle had transformed with grace, compassion, and history. The comment wasn't an accident. It was a calculated move, a weapon disguised as a joke, fired in full view of the nation, designed to rattle the man sitting across from him, the husband, the father, the first black president. But what Trump didn't understand, or maybe refused to, was that this moment had already outgrown the stage. Because this wasn't just about Michelle. It was about every woman who's been told she's too loud, too strong, too opinionated. Every immigrant family who watched Michelle's words about hope and belonging and believed they too had a place in this country. Every black girl who saw herself in her smile. Every mother who balanced public service and private sacrifice without applause. Michelle Obama represents something more than politics. She's cultural capital, a moral compass, the most admired woman in America for 6 years in a row. And in that instant, when her name was twisted into a punchline, millions of viewers felt something deeper than shock. They felt it in their bones. A line had been crossed. The insult wasn't just crude. It was dangerous. It told every girl watching that no matter how far you rise, someone will try to reduce you to nothing. It told every family watching that no matter how much you serve, someone will question your worth. And yet Obama didn't react like a man insulted. He reacted like a man who knew the weight of the moment because he'd seen it before. In South Carolina, when he was called too black. In Iowa, when he was called too foreign. In Washington, when he was told he wasn't American enough. But this time, it wasn't him. It was her. And Barack knew exactly what was at stake. If he stayed silent, the insult would stick. If he lashed out, the headlines would twist his anger into aggression. He had one shot to rise above it and strike where it mattered most. With truth. With composure. With power. The world was watching. Social media was already on fire. Clip after clip was being edited, tweeted, subtitled, uploaded. The tension wasn't just about what had been said. It was about what would be said next, because this wasn't just personal. It was political. And what Barack did next made history. Long before the stage lights bathed his face in theatrical glow, Donald Trump had already mastered the politics of provocation. He didn't rise to power on policy or principle. He rose on volume, on spectacle, on the steady drumbeat of division, calibrated for the camera. What others called gaffes, he branded as telling it like it is, and millions mistook cruelty for authenticity. But beneath the red ties and raised fists was always the same playbook: demean, distract, dominate, especially when it came to women of color. It started long before he stepped into the Oval Office, years before the birther movement, before the rallies, before the wall, before the chants. He'd mocked Rosie O'Donnell, sneered at Megyn Kelly, and dismissed women journalists as emotional or nasty. But something changed when the women pushed back, especially if they weren't white. Ilhan Omar. Send her back, Kamala Harris. Monster, Yamiche Alcindor. Threatening, Maxine Waters. Low IQ. And then there was Michelle. He never faced her directly, only through jabs, innuendos, rumors spread in dark corners of the internet he helped shine a spotlight on. The birther lie wasn't just about Barack. It was about Michelle too. About their children, their legitimacy, their right to be in the White House, to be American. To Trump, women like Michelle weren't just opponents. They were disruptions. Too poised, too educated, too beloved. They represented a version of America he didn't recognize or refuse to accept. An America where grace beats rage, where intellect outlasts insult, where dignity isn't weakness. But it wasn't just what Trump said. It was how he said it, with a smirk. The same smirk he wore on the debate stage that night. The one that said, "You won't hit back. You never do." It was a familiar expression practiced in boardrooms, campaign stops, TV studios. A performance sharpened by decades of press immunity and power. One built on the idea that shame is for other people. But something had started to change. The crowds were still there but smaller. The cheers more cautious. The headlines less forgiving. The smirk? Still there, but thinner now, like it knew the armor was cracking. And that's what made this comment feel different, because it wasn't slick. It wasn't clever. It was sloppy. The kind of remark you make when you assume there will be no consequence. When you've been surrounded too long by yes-men and enablers. When you think the rules never apply to you. But the country had changed. The audience had changed. And across from him sat a man who had built his legacy not on chaos, but on control. A man who had watched Trump's rise with the weary patience of someone who knew storms don't last forever. Barack Obama had seen the smirk before, on news anchors who questioned his name, on politicians who dismissed his candidacy, on donors who doubted his wife's tone. He'd learned how to outlast it, not by lowering himself, but by raising the bar. So when Trump delivered the line about Michelle, it wasn't just another insult, it was the final straw, because even villains have patterns. And Trump's was clear: create controversy, watch the media dance, deny accountability, and smirk through the wreckage. It had worked until now. But this time, he miscalculated. He wasn't up against a talking head or a nervous moderator. He wasn't dealing with someone chasing poll numbers. This time he sat across from the most disciplined political communicator of a generation. A husband, a father, a man who had kept quiet through 1,000 provocations but wouldn't stay silent for this one. Trump had the volume, but Obama had the weight. And when that smirk curled across his lips, certain he'd just thrown the punch that would rattle. His opponent, he didn't see what was coming next. He didn't see the silence, the stillness, the fire behind calm eyes. Because this time, he underestimated the man sitting across from him. Before the cameras, before the presidency, before history carved his name into textbooks, Barack Obama was just a boy with a funny name and big questions. Born in Hawaii, raised by a single white mother from Kansas, and doted on by his grandparents, he was a puzzle even to himself. A child of two worlds, not quite belonging to either. He studied his father's photograph the way most kids read comic books searching for clues to a power he didn't yet understand. There was no silver spoon, no political dynasty, no safety net, just books, dreams, and a growing hunger to matter. It was in the south side of Chicago that Barack found his footing, not in ivory towers, but in community halls where fluorescent lights flickered overhead and working-class families gathered, not for policy, but for help. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't the richest, but he listened. And in listening, he learned what politics often forgets. People don't need saviors. They need someone who sees them. He rose fast, yes, but not by cutting corners. He wrote. He taught. He walked neighborhoods with clipboard in hand, shaking the same calloused hands that would one day applaud him on election night. And then, in a story so improbable it could only happen in America, he became the first black president of the United States. But the quiet truth behind that meteoric rise was Michelle long before the inauguration, before the motorcades, before the swearing in. Michelle Robinson was there challenging him, grounding him, believing in him when the world still called him too ambitious. A South Side native, who rose through Princeton and Harvard Law with sharp elbows and sharper intellect, Michelle wasn't just Barack's partner. She was his North Star. They were equals from the start. She never tried to soften herself to fit into his story. He never tried to outshine her to fit into history's mold. When America met Michelle, they didn't just see a first lady. They saw strength in heels, grace under scrutiny, wit without apology. She was a mother, a mentor, a style icon, a policy advocate, a cultural force. And through it all, the racism, the rumors, the relentless press, she smiled, not because she was unfazed, but because she refused to let them win. She launched Let's Move, reshaped school nutrition, redefined the role of First Lady from ornamental to operational. And when she stood before crowds of thousands telling girls to stay in school, telling boys to respect women, telling America to rise above hate, she didn't speak as a political spouse. She spoke as a woman who had earned her place. Social media exploded with admiration. Chatter Michelle 2024 trended more than once. Her memoir sold millions. Interviews became viral sermons. She wasn't a symbol of perfection. She was a mirror of resilience. And Barack knew all of it. He knew the nights she stayed up with Sasha while he was on the campaign trail. He knew how hard she fought to shield their daughters from the cameras, the chaos, the cruelty. He knew how many times she swallowed pain to keep the country from flinching. So when Donald Trump uttered that line when he tried to reduce her to some relic of domesticity, to erase her years of public service with one sexist jab, Barack wasn't just hearing an insult. He was hearing history try to repeat itself. Because that's what power does when it feels threatened. It belittles, it mocks, it tries to shrink greatness into something it can manage. But Michelle Obama could never be managed, and Barack Obama? He'd spent his whole life preparing for moments exactly like this. He'd learned how to remain calm in the storm, how to disarm a crowd with a pause, how to turn a phrase into a movement. But most importantly, he'd learned when not to stay silent. And this was one of those times, because this wasn't just about Michelle. It was about every girl who saw her and believed she could be more. Every boy who learned to respect rather than ridicule. Every family that felt pride seeing someone who looked like them walking through the White House colonnade. This was about legacy, about love, about lines you don't cross no matter how smug your smirk, no matter how loud your applause. Obama didn't need to yell to be heard. He didn't need to point to the cameras to remind people who he was. He just needed to rise. That's who he was defending, and he wasn't about to let it slide. The room hadn't recovered. Trump's first shot about Michelle still lingered in. The air like smoke after a firework, acrid, unwanted, impossible to ignore. But the moderators, cornered by format and fear, pushed forward with the next question, hoping to reset the tone. It didn't work. Trump wasn't finished. He shifted. In his chair, rolling his shoulders like a prize fighter warming up for another round. He glanced sideways at Obama, then leaned toward his mic again, lips curled, eyes sparkling with malice disguised as amusement. "I mean, honestly, Barack," he said, voice syrupy with sarcasm, "Michelle spent 8 years lecturing Americans and still never figured out how to make them like her. Maybe it's just the tone. Maybe America's tired of being scolded at dinner." The audience groaned, soft but audible. Even a few conservative-leaning spectators flinched. A woman in the front row whispered something to her husband and shook her head. The moderator opened his mouth to pivot, but Trump barreled ahead. "It's not personal," Trump added with mock innocence. "Just, maybe she wasn't as beloved as you think she was." Obama didn't blink. He sat motionless, one leg crossed, over the other, hands relaxed in his lap. The tension wasn't in his body, it was in the room. Thick, electric, waiting. The camera cut to Obama's face. And there it was. The head tilt, barely noticeable, barely emotion at all. But it was enough. Enough to signal the shift. Enough to send a chill through the audience. Enough for every political junkie watching at home to lean in, sensing something seismic was about to land. Obama slowly turned, his eyes toward the moderator as if to say, "I got this." Trump, meanwhile, smirked again, thinking he'd hit the target, thinking he'd thrown his opponent off balance. He shuffled a stack of notes in front of him, pretending to be unbothered, but his tone had grown louder, more erratic. He kept talking, over-talking, throwing in stats, spinning polls, rattling off talking points about gas prices and border walls, none of it connected. The words were filler, smoke, delay. Because something had shifted. The audience felt it. The commentators backstage felt it. Even the moderators, usually trained to remain expressionless, glanced at each other as if to ask, "Is this about to happen?" Obama shifted in his chair. His fingers gently tapped the table. 1 beat, 2, then he exhaled not a sigh, but a reset. The kind you take when it's time to deliver a line that will outlive the broadcast. The room hushed. Even Trump, mid-ramble, hesitated. There was no cue, no music swell, just silence. And then, with a voice calm as steel, Obama said, Obama looked directly at Trump, not with rage, not with pity, just focus sharp and unwavering. Then he leaned into the microphone, his voice low but cutting, the kind of calm that commands silence. "Don't you ever speak about my wife like that again." He paused. The words landed like a gavel. The room frozen. Not a yell, not a threat, just precision. He didn't blink, didn't smirk, just held the air in his hands like a seasoned orator, letting it vibrate. Between them. Then came the second strike. "Michelle Obama is twice the leader you'll ever be." Scattered gasps. One clap hesitant, then another. But Obama wasn't speaking for applause. He wasn't here to spar. He was here to set the record straight. "You talk about her tone," he said. eyes narrowing. "But what you mean is that she was unafraid to tell the truth. That she stood on stages you'll never earn and spoke to a country you never cared to understand." Another pause. Trump shifted in his chair, suddenly less cocky, unsure whether to interrupt or absorb. "You mock her education, her poise, her power," Obama continued. "But behind every jab is a fear you won't admit, out loud. You fear women like her because they don't need your permission to lead." The audience stirred. A few heads nodded. The woman in the front row who'd shaken her head earlier was now holding her breath. "And here's what you really don't like," Obama added, voice still steady. "You don't like that real people trusted her, that she could walk into a classroom, a military base, a room full of foreign leaders, and leave it better than she found it. You don't like that she built legacy without stepping on a single neck." Murmurs turned to hums. Even the moderators were visibly stunned. But Obama kept going. "You want America to forget what dignity looks like, to forget what strength without cruelty sounds like. You think if you say something loud enough, often enough, people will start to believe it." He leaned forward slightly. "But America remembers her. And America's watching you." Twitter erupted. "Don't you ever. Michelle deserves better." Obama mic drop clips of the moment began flooding timelines. Teenagers were already remixing it on TikTok. Political commentators were typing through commercial breaks. Someone added cinematic music under the clip and posted it with the caption, "Obama went full dad mode, and I'm here for it." Back on stage, Obama wasn't finished. "You like to talk about lecturing Americans," he said, turning toward the camera now. "But I'll take a lecture in decency over a legacy of division any day." The crowd responded, applause rising. Trump fidgeted. His smirk had vanished. "You diminish her to elevate yourself," Obama said. "You always have. Women, immigrants, journalists, veterans, even your own staff, no one escapes your belittling unless they're willing to bow." A silence fell again, as if the audience needed a beat to let the truth settle. Then Obama delivered the final blow. Not shouted, but spoken like scripture. "But here's what you can't shrink, no matter how many insults you hurl. Character, integrity, service. You can't erase what Michelle has built. And you will not rewrite her story with cheap lines and cheaper lies." The applause burst, now standing, sustained. It wasn't just cheers. It was release. Vindication. For everyone who had watched the Obamas endure with grace what few public figures ever had. For every woman who had been silenced with a smirk. For every black family who had turned the other cheek more times than they could count. And in that moment, something shifted. Even people who had tuned in expecting a circus got something else. A reminder of what leadership could look like. Measured, fearless, grounded in truth. On screen, tweets kept flying. "Obama just dismantled Trump without raising his voice. Masterclass. That is how you defend your partner." Whoo. The line, "Don't you ever," will be on t-shirts by morning. Meanwhile, Trump sat there, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. He tried to speak but was drowned out by applause. His voice, once the loudest in the room, had become an echo. And Obama? He didn't gloat. He didn't gesture. He simply leaned back in his chair, as if the moment spoke for itself. Because it did. The commentators would call it the defining exchange of the debate. Clips would air on morning shows, late-night monologues, college campuses, and everywhere in between. Civil rights leaders would repost it. Veterans would share it. Teachers would quote it in class. But for Barack Obama, it was never about the moment. It was about the message. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you model. And when someone you love is disrespected in public, silence isn't. Diplomacy, it's complicity. He'd made his choice. He stood for dignity. He stood for truth. He stood for her. But it wasn't just the crowd that erupted. What happened next was bigger than the stage. It didn't take hours. It didn't even take minutes. Within seconds of Obama's quiet, searing line, "Don't you ever," the internet detonated. "Don't you ever" rocketed to the #1 trend worldwide, faster than any debate clip in modern history. Twitter. Timelines transformed into digital battlegrounds, lit with GIFs, quotes, applause emojis, and praise that felt almost sacred. One tweet read, "Obama didn't just defend Michelle. He defended every woman who's ever been disrespected in silence." Another simply said, "He spoke. We felt it." Newsrooms scrambled. Editors barked orders over Slack. Video teams clipped the moment. Headlines rolled out with the speed of thunder. Obama's mic drop moment stuns Trump. The line that left a nation speechless. Obama to Trump. "Don't you ever," and America listened. By midnight, even those who hadn't watched. The debate live had seen the moment reposted, recontextualized, turned into memes, TikToks, digital murals. One TikTok, set to a cinematic bass drop, looped Obama's line with Michelle walking in slow motion beside him, captioned, "This is what partnership looks like." It hit 2 million views before sunrise. On Instagram, AOC posted a clip with the caption, "Respect isn't optional." "We saw a masterclass tonight." Kerry Washington tweeted, "That's how you love out loud. President Obama, we see you." Trevor Noah dropped a 3-minute reaction video filmed in his living room. "That wasn't just a clapback," he said wide-eyed. "That was a symphony of accountability." Michelle's name trended on its own. Michelle deserves better, filled with tributes, old speeches, photos of her in power poses, memes of her adjusting her blazer like armor. And through it all, Trump tried to spin. On Truth Social, he posted in all caps, "Boring Obama. Fake outrage. Michelle never liked me anyway." The post was immediately ratioed. Screenshots spread like wildfire, layered with laughing emojis and side-by-side comparisons of Trump's red-faced retort and Obama's cool silence. Conservative commentators hit the morning shows bruised and scrambling. "This is just performance politics," one host insisted. Another countered, "Performance or not, it landed. It landed." On Fox News, a rare moment of hesitation broke through. "I'm just saying," one panelist muttered. "You don't go after Michelle. You just don't." Meanwhile, the White House released no statement. They didn't need to, because the message was clear. The country had chosen its moment. Young activists used it as fuel. College campuses held impromptu rallies, blasting Obama's clip through portable speakers. In group chats and classroom discussions, students talked about Michelle not just as a former First Lady, but as an icon who had been disrespected and powerfully defended. Posters went up overnight in dorm halls. "Don't you ever say it for your mother, your sister, your partner, yourself." Some teachers even paused their morning lessons to play the clip. In one Detroit classroom, a 10th grader stood up afterward and said, "That's the kind of president I want. One who protects." By noon, editorial think pieces dropped. Obama redefined what strength looks like. Masculinity without threat. The Obama Doctrine. When character spoke louder than chaos. CNN's Chiron read simply, "Obama. Don't you ever," and the nation heard him. On late night, comedians barely changed the script. Stephen Colbert opened his monologue with one line. "So, anyone else want to insult Michelle Obama?" Didn't think so? But while the nation buzzed, one man was notably silent. Trump didn't show up to the post-debate press conference. His team said he had another engagement. No one bought it. Behind the scenes, insiders leaked that he was furious not just at Obama, but at how completely he had lost the room. He raged about moderators, camera angles, and overreaction. But it didn't matter. The internet had already written the headline, printed the shirt, and set the moment in motion. Backstage, Obama left the studio with Michelle on the phone. He didn't gloat. He didn't linger. But those who saw him say he looked lighter. Not because he had won a debate, but because he had said what needed to be said. Outside, a small crowd waited. Someone shouted, "We love you, Michelle," smiled. Quietly, and while America celebrated, Trump stewed alone. The applause had faded. The hashtags had trended. But when the moderators gave Barack Obama the final word, he didn't reach for victory. He reached for meaning. He looked out. Over the audience, some still standing, some wiping their eyes, some stunned into stillness and then into the camera. Into the living rooms, classrooms, hospital break rooms, and family kitchens where millions were watching. And he began. "You know," he said, voice even, "I didn't come here tonight planning to talk about Michelle. I came to talk about policies, about jobs, about the future. But sometimes, the moment calls you somewhere deeper. A breath. Not a pause, a letting go. She's the most grounded person I know. Raised on the south side of Chicago, in a family that taught her to work twice as hard and never expect applause. And still, she gave this country everything. Grace. Vision. Heart." The audience quieted again. Reverent. "But what I want people to understand," he continued, "is that loving a strong woman doesn't make you less of a man. It makes you more." A few claps. Then more. "It takes strength to support someone who stands tall on her own. It takes maturity to see that partnership isn't about spotlight, it's about purpose. It's about lifting each other." He leaned in slightly, more conversational now. And that's what public service should be. Not tearing people down. To feel tall. Not mocking others to cover your fear. It should be about building. About carrying the weight together. About dignity. Then he slowed. The tone shifting. The lesson rising. Dignity means showing up even when they doubt you. It means speaking truth without venom. It means refusing to be pulled into the gutter, no matter how many times they try to drag you there. A beat. Then the words that would echo long after the stage lights dimmed. "You don't need to shout to be strong. You don't need to hate to be heard." The room held its breath. "You just need to know who you are and what you stand for." Silence again. Not empty. Full. Heavy with meaning. And then a smile. Not smug. Not performative. Just real. He looked back into the camera one last time. "America's been through a lot. But I still believe we know the difference between a cheap insult and real leadership. I still believe we know who we are when we're at our best." He paused, just long enough. And maybe, just maybe, America remembered who we were meant to be. The clip is already etched into digital memory. Barack Obama, calm as ever, looked a bully in the eye and without shouting, without slurs, without theatrics, he dismantled him. Live. On national television. With clarity. With purpose. With love. This wasn't just a political moment. It was a moral one. In a culture drowning in noise, he showed us that silence, when broken with truth, can still shake a nation. He didn't stoop. He didn't rage. He stood for Michelle, for respect, for all of us who've watched power try to silence grace. He reminded us, class doesn't cower. Dignity doesn't flinch. And real leadership doesn't insult it, uplifts. So, now it's not just about what happened on that debate stage. It's about what happens next. Because every one of us is standing at our own fork in the road. Do we choose mockery or meaning? Do we amplify cruelty or compassion? Do we shrug off injustice or stand beside those who rise above it? You already know where we stand, so we ask you. Subscribe if you still believe truth matters. Share this video if dignity should never go out of style. And drop A in the comments if Michelle Obama will always deserve our respect. This isn't just about one moment. It's a movement. And history? It's watching. What side will you be on?